Welcome to Heaven's Son. Today we are going to read Surah, so we're going to read the Bible, and then we're going to... Did it wrong again? Unless Daniel's not doing daily devotions.
I am doing devotions.
Okay. You heard the guy. We're going to be doing daily devotions with Daniel, and then we're going to read the Bible, and then we're going to be doing substance, and then we're going to read... I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to look at it. Daniel just whispered it to me. I didn't even hear it. I think it's like... Oh, it's Return of the King. I didn't look over there. I looked over there. Ha. Cheated. But you can see here we're all the way in Kansas. So, hope you enjoy. Here's my brother for the devotions with Daniel. Hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to subscribe to the video. And...
This is Banana Man. Hello. And now for Devotions with Daniel. Okay. So today's August 20th. 5-star restorations. He who has begun a good work in you will complete it. Philippians 1:6. If you have a lot of money and like to travel, check into 5-star hotels that have the word restored in their descriptions. There's a hotel in Venice, for example, in a master fully restored 14th century residence filled with Murano glass chandeliers, carved pink marble columns, stained glass, and gilded ceilings. In Amsterdam, a luxury hotel was created when a series of 17th century canal houses were restored and turned into 230 unique rooms. Wow. Most of us don't have the money for 5-star travel, but we can all appreciate the craft of restoration. It happens when something broken down is renovated. When something broken down is renovated. Somehow, the architects and builders managed to make it more magnificent than it was originally. Restoration is more than restoring, it is improving. That's what God does with us. We're under construction, and we may have broken down areas in our lives. His aim isn't simply to restore, but to edify, improve, and perfect that which concerns us. When God restored Job's life, for example, he left him better than before. He can do the same with you. If your progress seems slow while it appears those around you are engaged in remarkable success, just remember, God is not finished with you yet. Ted W. Engstrom.
Greetings! Thank you, one person, for showing up and watching this video live. All right, so we are on 2 Samuel chapter 19, and we're going to read about Joab and David. And this is the English Standard Version. Let me begin. It was told Joab, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard that day, "The king is grieving for his son." And the people stole into the city that day as people steal in who are ashamed when they flee in battle. The king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants who have this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines, because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. For you have made it clear today their commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night, and this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. Then the king arose and took his seat in the gate, and the people were all told, Behold, the king is sitting in the gate. And all the people came before the king. Now Israel had fled every man to his own home, and all the people were arguing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies, and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled out of the land of Absalom, or land from Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? And King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house, when the word of all Israel has come to the king? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king, and say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if you are not commander of my army from now on in place of Joab. And he swayed the heart of all the men of Judah as one man, so that they sent word to the king, Return, both you and all your servants. So the king came back to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring the king over the Jordan. And Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried to come down with the men of Judah to meet King David, and with him were 8,000 men from Benjamin. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and his 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan before the king, and they crossed the ford to bring over the king's household and to do his pleasure. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan, and said to the king, Let not my lord hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Do not let the king take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king. Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, cursed the Lord's anointed. But David said, What have I to do with you, the sons of Zeruiah? I don't know how to say that you should this day be as an adversary to me. Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel? And the king said to Shimei, You shall not die. And the king gave him his oath. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came back in safety. And when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? He said, My lord, O king, my servant deceived me, for your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go with the king. For your servant is lame. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king, but you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I then to cry to the king? And the king said to him, Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided, you and Ziba shall divide the land. And Mephibosheth said to the king, Oh, let him take it all, since my lord the king has come safely home. Now Barzillai, the Gileadite, had come down to Rogelim, and he went on with the king to the Jordan to escort him over the Jordan. Barzillai was very aged man, 80 years old. He had provided the king with food while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. And the king said to Barzillai, Come over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the king, How many years have I still to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or what he drinks? Can I still listen to the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. But here is your servant Chimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you. And the king answered, Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you. And all that you desire of me I will do for you. Then all the people went over the Jordan, and the king went over, and the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own home. The king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him. All the people of Judah and also half the people of Israel brought the king on his way. Then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, Why have our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household over the Jordan, and all David's men with him? And the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is our close relative. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, We have 10 shares in the king, and in David also we have more than you. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. And that is the end of chapter 19. I hope that God is blessing you with the reading of his word. At this time, we are going to have a synopsis of what happened in the entire last book called The Two Towers, before we begin Return of the King. And since I don't remember anything that happened, here's Kimberly to say how it really happened.
Finally! Dad didn't kill everybody! Mom and I did our nails together. Mine's extremely shiny, and Mom and JJ came back from visiting Becca, and they got me a really nice necklace. So what happened was not that. I just wanted to say, so we know how, a quick recap of what happened in, at the end of the last book, so it makes sense. Boromir died, and then, in a battle, Merry and Pippin got captured. Aragorn, Boromir, and Legolas went after Merry and Pippin.
Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas.
You just said
Yeah.
Boromir died.
Boromir went after...
Gimli, I'm sorry, I'm really getting him confused.
Boromir went after the hobbits after he died.
Right. his ghost.
Yeah, his ghost went after him.
I'm sorry, I'm good with remembering what happened, but bad with the names.
Right when she finished the names, we switched books.
Yeah, what he said. And, like, don't even get me started with Boromir and Faramir. Their names are too similar. It's Sauron and Saruman. I'm getting off topic, but, Merry and Pippin, they went with orcs for a bit, and then a battle happened. They managed to escape. They went into the forest, the Fangorn forest, and they rallied the Ints to destroy Isengard. And while this is happening, Gimli, I got it right, Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas are chasing them, and they make it over to Fangorn, and then they meet Gandalf, and Gandalf's like, hey, we gotta go this way now. So they go over to Rohan, and they're like, they talk to the king, and they're like, hey, this dude, Wormtongue, he's totally manipulating you. And then they kick him out. Then Wormtongue goes over to Sauron, or Saruman, whichever it is.
Saruman.
Okay, Saruman. He goes over to Saruman. And he's like, hey, they totally figured out that I'm a bad guy. And then the Ints attack. Actually, the Ints attack, and then he gets there. And then, so, Saruman, he sent, like, most of his orcs to go attack at Helm's Deep. And, like, right before the Ints attack. So, there's a battle at Helm's Deep, and the good guys win. And while all of this is happening, Frodo and Sam, they go over, they meet Faramir, Boromir's brother, and they learn that he died, and, because they didn't know. And then, Gollum, he takes them over to that, the only way into Mordor besides the gate, at the Black Gate. That's what it's called, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Porta Negra.
then what happens is, they get caught by this gigantic spider named Shelob. And, Shelob poisons Frodo, and it knocks him out. He's, like, unconscious, and it's like he's dead, but he's not really. It's like he's in a coma where he's almost dead.
He's in stasis.
Yeah, JJ summed it up. And then Sam's like, after scaring away Shelob, he's like, oh no, Frodo's dead! And then he takes the ring and he's like, okay, I have to complete the quest. And then a few orcs find him and he's like, oh my gosh, I should not have left him, oh no! And he puts on the ring to keep from getting caught. He overhears him saying, oh yeah, Shelob never kills her prey and eats it dead. She always eats it alive. And then he's like, oh wait, he's alive! He's gonna wake up! So, I forgot to say, everybody who was at the battle, they made it over to Isengard. The battle at Helm's Deep, they made it over to Isengard. They realized the Ints literally demolished all the orcs. And then, and Gandalf's there too. I'm going to hand it off to Dad, who's going to read Return of the King.
So, what we left out of that was that while they were in Isengard, they discovered this thing, like a crystal ball, called a Palantir, that Saruman, I don't remember exactly how he lost it, but anyway, wound up with the...
Wormtongue threw it out the window.
Oh, right, Wormtongue threw it out the window. Perfecto!
Do it in my closet.
And
Okay, I got it. So he threw it out the window, and then
One of the hobbits.
oh. So they all were headed back to, I don't know if they were going to Rohan or Gondor or somewhere. Anyway, and Pippin, because he's a fool of a took, so it's always Pippin. Pippin reached out and touched the Palantir, and so he actually had a little conversation with Sauron, because that's what the Palantir does, is it kind of has a conversation with the other Palantirs, and one of the people that had the other Palantir is Sauron. And so Gandalf figures that, well, there wasn't that much damage done because Sauron just figured it was a halfling that was controlled by Saruman, but didn't really give away any information. And then, so Gandalf and Pippin go to get on a horse in the middle of the night, and they take off. And now, what? Shadowfax, of course. And they take off. My screen froze for a second. They take off, and now Pippin is fixing to begin a real adventure. So this is the Return of the King. Again, this is a really nice edition that we got. And so here it is. There's the back side. So sorry for the glare. And I'm going to take off the dust jacket to keep it nice, because I know that if I keep it on, then it's going to get ruined probably over the time that it takes me to read this book. So now we are going to begin Return of the King. And this is book 5 of Lord of the Rings. And chapter 1, Minas Tirith. Let me begin. Pippin looked out from the shelter of Gandalf's cloak. Remember, they're on Shadowfax. He wondered if he was awake or still sleeping, still in the swift-moving dream in which he had been wrapped so long since the great ride began. The dark world was rushing by, and the wind sang loudly in his ears. He could see nothing but the wheeling stars, and away to his right vast shadows against the sky where the mountains of the south marched past. Sleepily he tried to reckon the times and stages of their journey, but his memory was drowsy and uncertain. There had been the first ride at terrible speed without a halt, and then in the dawn he had seen a pale gleam of gold, and they had come to the silent town and the great empty house on the hill, and hardly had they reached its shelter when the winged shadow had passed over once again, and men wilted with fear, but Gandalf had spoken soft words to him, and he had slept in a corner, tired but uneasy, dimly aware of comings and goings, and of men talking, and Gandalf giving orders. And then again riding in the night. This was the third night since he had looked in the stone, and with that hideous memory he woke fully and shivered, and the noise of the wind became filled with menacing voices. A light kindled in the sky, a blaze of yellow fire behind dark barriers. Pippin cowered back, afraid for a moment, wondering into what dreadful country Gandalf was bearing him. Are we good, or are we going to settle eventually? He rubbed his eyes, and then he saw that it was the moon rising above the eastern shadows, now almost at the full. So the night was not yet old, and for hours the dark journey would go on. He stirred and spoke. "Where are we, Gandalf?" he asked. "In the realm of Gondor," the wizard answered. "The land of Anorian is still passing by." There was a silence again for a while. Then, "What is that?" cried Pippin, suddenly clutching at Gandalf's cloak. "Look, fire, red fire! And there, dragons in the land! Look, there is another!" For answer, Gandalf cried aloud to his horse, "On, Shadowfax! We must hasten! Time is short! See! The beacons of Gondor are alight, calling for aid! War is kindled! See, there is the fire of Amondine, and the flame on Eilenach! And there they go speeding west, Nardol, Erelos, Min Rimon, Calenhad, and the Halifirian on the borders of Rohan." But Shadowfax paused in his stride, slowing to a walk, and then he lifted up his head and neighed. And out of the darkness the answering neigh of the other horses came, and presently the thudding of hoofs was heard, and 3 riders swept up and passed like flying ghosts in the moon and vanished into the west. Then Shadowfax gathered himself together and sprang away, and the night flowed over him like a roaring wind. Pippin became drowsy again and paid little attention to Gandalf telling him of the customs of Gondor and how the lord of the city had beacons built on the tops of outlying hills along both borders of the Great Range, and maintained posts at these points where fresh horses were always in readiness to bear his errand riders to Rohan in the north or to Belfalas in the south. "It is long since the beacons of the north were lit," he said, "and in the ancient days of Gondor they were not needed, for they had the 7 stones." Pippin stirred uneasily. "Sleep again and do not be afraid," said Gandalf, "for you are not going like Frodo to Mordor, but to Minas Tirith, and there you will be as safe as you can be anywhere in these days. If Gondor falls or the ring is taken, then the Shire will be no refuge." "You do not comfort me," said Pippin, but nonetheless sleep crept over him. The last thing that he remembered before he fell into deep dream was a glimpse of high white peaks, glimmering like floating isles above the clouds as they caught the light of the westering moon. He wondered where Frodo was, and if he was already in Mordor, or if he was dead. And he did not know that Frodo from far away looked on that same moon as it set beyond Gondor ere the coming of the day. Pippin woke to the sound of voices. Another day of hiding and a night of journey had fleeted by. It was twilight, the cold dawn was at hand again, and chill grey mists were about them. Shadowfax stood steaming with sweat, but he held his neck proudly and showed no sign of weariness. Many tall men, heavily cloaked, stood beside him, and behind them in the mist loomed a wall of stone. Partly ruinous it seemed, but already before the night was past, the sound of hurried labor could be heard, beat of hammers, clink of trowels, and the creak of wheels. Torches and flares glowed dully here and there in the fog. Gandalf was speaking to the men that barred his way, and he listened. And as he listened, Pippin became aware that he himself was being discussed. "Yea, truly, we know you, Mithrandir," said the leader of the men, "and you know the passwords of the 7 gates and are free to go forward, but we do not know your companion. What is he? A dwarf out of the mountains in the north? We wish for no strangers in the land at this time, unless they be mighty men of arms in whose faith and help we can trust." "I will vouch for him before the seat of Denethor," said Gandalf. "And as for valor, that cannot be compared by stature. He has passed through more battles and perils than you have, Ingold, though you be twice his height, and he comes now from the storming of Isengard, of which we bear tidings, and great weariness is on him, or I would wake him. His name is Peregrine, a very valiant man." "Man," said Ingold dubiously, and the others laughed. "Man," said Pippin, now thoroughly roused. "Man, indeed not. I am a hobbit, and no more valiant than I am a man, save perhaps now and again by necessity. Do not let Gandalf deceive you." "Many a doer of great deeds might say no more," said Ingold. "But what is a hobbit?" "A halfling," answered Gandalf. "Nay, not the one that was spoken of," he added, seeing the wonder in the men's faces. "Not he, yet one of his kindred." "Yes, and one who journeyed with him," said Pippin. "And Boromir of your city was with us, and he saved me in the snows of the north, and at last he was slain defending me from many foes." "Peace," said Gandalf. "The news of that grief should have been told first to the father." "It has been guessed already," said Ingold, "for there have been strange portents here of late. But pass on now quickly, for the Lord of Minas Tirith will be eager to see any that bear the latest tidings of his son, be he man or—" "Hobbit," said Pippin. "Little service can I offer to your lord, but what I can do I would do, remembering Boromir the brave." Fare you well, said Ingold, and the men made way for Shadowfax, and he passed through the narrow gate to the wall. May you bring good counsel to Denethor in his need, and to us all, Mithrandir, Ingold cried. But you come with tidings of grief and danger, as is your wont, they say. Because I come seldom, but when my help is needed, answered Gandalf. And as for counsel, to you I would say that you are overlate in repairing the wall of the Pelennor. Courage now will be your best defense against the storm that is at hand. That and such hope as I bring. Fear not, or for not all the tidings that I bring are evil, but leave your trowels and sharpen your swords. The work will be finished ere evening, said Ingold. This is the last portion of the wall to be put in defense, the least open to attack, for it looks toward our friends of Rohan. Do you know aught of them? Will they answer the summons, think you? Yes, they will come, but they have fought many battles at your back. This road and no road looks toward safety any longer. Be vigilant. But for Gandalf Stormcrow, you would have seen a host of foes coming out of Andorian, and no riders of Rohan, and you may yet. Fare you well, and sleep not. Gandalf passed now into the wide land beyond the Ramas Echor. So the men of Gondor called the outwall that they had built with great labor after Ithilien fell under the shadow of their enemy. For 10 leagues or more it ran from the mountain's feet, and so back again, enclosing in its fence the fields of the Pelennor. Fair and fertile townlands on the long slopes, and terraces falling to the deep levels of the Anduin. At its furthest point from the great gate of the city, northeastward, the wall was 4 leagues distant, and there, from the frowning bank, it overlooked the long flats beside the river, and men had made it high and strong, for at that point, upon a walled causeway, the road came in from the fords and bridges of Osgiliath, and passed through a guarded gate between embattled towers. At its nearest point, the wall was little more than 1 league from the city, and that was southeastward. There Anduin, going in a wide knee about the hills of Emin Arnen in South Ithilien, bent sharply west, and the outwall rose upon its very brink, and beneath it lay the quays and landings of the Harland for craft that came upstream from the southern fiefs. The townlands were rich with wide thilth and many orchards, and homesteads there were with oast and garner, fold and byre, and many rills rippling through the green from the highlands down to Anduin. Yet the herdsmen and husbandmen that dwelt there were not many, and the most part of the people of Gondor lived in the 7 circles of the city, or in the high vales of the mountain borders on the Losanach, or further south in fair Lebanon with its 5 swift streams. There dwelt a hardy folk between the mountains and the sea. They were reckoned men of Gondor, yet their blood was mingled, and there were short and swarthy folk among them whose sires came more from the forgotten men who housed in the shadow of the hills in the dark years ere the coming of the kings. But beyond, in the great fief of Belfalas, dwelt Prince Imrahil in his castle of Dol Amroth by the sea, and he was of high blood, and his folk also, tall men and proud, with sea-grey eyes. Now, after Gandalf had ridden for some time, the light of day grew in the sky, and Pippin roused himself and looked up. To his left lay a sea of mist rising to a bleak shadow in the east, but to his right great mountains reared their heads, ranging from the west to a steep and sudden end, as if in the making of the land the river had burst through a great barrier, carving out the mighty valley to be land of battle and debate in times to come. And there, where the white mountains of Ered Nimrais came to their end, he saw, as Gandalf had promised, the dark mass of Mount Mindoluin, the deep purple shadows of its high glens, and its tall face whitening in the rising day. And upon its outthrust knee was the guarded city, with its 7 walls of stone so strong and old that it seemed to have been not builded but carven by giants out of the bones of the earth. Even as Pippin gazed in wonder, the walls passed from looming gray to white, blushing faintly in the dawn, and suddenly the sun climbed over the eastern shadow and sent forth a shaft that smote the face of the city. Then Pippin cried aloud, for the tower of Ecthelion, standing high within the topmost wall, shone out against the sky, glimmering like a spike of pearl and silver, tall and fair and shapely, and its pinnacle glittered as if it were wrought of crystals, and white banners broke and fluttered from the battlements in the morning breeze, and high and far he heard a clear ringing as of silver trumpets. So Gandalf and Peregrine rode to the great gate of the men of Gondor at the rising of the sun, and its iron doors rolled back before them. "Mithrandir, Mithrandir!" men cried. "Now we know that the storm is indeed nigh." "It is upon you," said Gandalf. "I have ridden on its wings. Let me pass. I must come to your Lord Denethor while his stewardship lasts. Whatever betide you have come to the end of the Gondor that you have known. Let me pass." Then men fell back before the command of his voice, and questioned him no further, though they gazed in wonder at the hobbit that sat before him, and at the horse that bore him. For the people of the city used horses very little, and they were seldom seen in their streets, save only those ridden by the errand riders of their lord. And they said, "Surely that is one of the great steeds of the king of Rohan. May be the Rohirrim will come soon to strengthen us." But Shadowfax walked proudly up the long, winding road. For the fashion of Minas Tirith was such that it was built on 7 levels, each delved into the hill, and about each was set a wall, and in each wall was a gate. But the gates were not set in a line. The great gate in the city wall was at the east point of the circuit, but the next faced half south, and the third half north, and so to and fro upward, so that the paved way that climbed toward the citadel turned first this way and then that across the face of the hill. And each time that it passed the line of the great gate, it went through an arched tunnel, piercing a vast pier of rock, whose huge outthrust bulk divided in two all the circles of the city save the first. For partly in the primeval shaping of the hill, partly by the mighty craft and labor of old, there stood up from the rear of the wide court behind the gate a towering bastion of stone, its edge sharp as a ship keel facing east. Up it rose even to the level of the topmost circle, and there was crowned by a battlement, so that those in the citadel might, like mariners in a mountainous ship, look from its peak sheer down upon the gate 700 feet below. The entrance to the citadel also looked eastward, but was delved in the heart of the rock. Thence a long lamplit slope ran up to the 7th gate. Thus men reached at last the high court and the place of the fountain before the feet of the white tower, tall and shapely, 50 fathoms from its base to the pinnacle, where the banner of the stewards floated 1,000 feet above the plain. A strong citadel it was indeed, and not to be taken by a host of enemies, if there were any within that could hold weapons, unless some foe could come behind and scale the lower skirts of Mindoluin, and so come upon the narrow shoulder that joined the hill of Guard to the mountain mass. But that shoulder, which rose to the height of the 5th wall, was hedged with the great ramparts right up to the precipice that overhung its western end, and in that space stood the houses and domed tombs of bygone kings and lords, forever silent, between the mountain and the tower. Pippin gazed in growing wonder at the great stone city, vaster and more splendid than anything he had ever dreamed of, greater and stronger than Isengard, and far more beautiful. Yet it was in truth falling year by year into decay, and already it lacked half the men that could have dwelt at ease there. In every street they passed, some great house or court over whose door and arched gates were carved many fair letters of strange and ancient shapes, names Pippin guessed of great men and kindreds that had once dwelt there, and yet now they were silent, and no footsteps rang on their wide pavements, nor voice was heard in their halls, nor any face looked out from door or empty window. At last they came out of the shadow to the 7th gate, and the warm sun that shone down beyond the river as Frodo walked in the glades of Ithilien glowed here on the smooth walls and rooted pillars, and the great arch with keystone carven in the likeness of the crowned and kingly head. Gandalf dismounted, for no horse was allowed in the citadel, and Shadowfax suffered himself to be led away at the soft word of his master. The guards of the gate were robed in black, and their helms were of strange shape, high crowned with long cheek guards close fitting to the face, and above the cheek guards were set the white wings of sea birds, but the helms gleamed with a flame of silver, for they were indeed wrought of mithril, heirlooms from the glory of old days. Upon the black surcoats were embroidered in white a tree blossoming like snow beneath a silver crown and many pointed stars. This was the livery of the heirs of Elendil, and none wore it now in all Gondor save the guards of the citadel before the court of the fountain where the white tree once had grown. Already it seemed that word of their coming had gone before them, and at once they were admitted silently and without question. Quickly Gandalf strode across the white-paved court. Is Daniel awake? I think not.
Well, tell him what happened tomorrow.
Okay, I'm going to at least finish this section, and we might stop a little earlier than I had originally planned. There's no way we can get through this chapter anyway. We've got 20 pages left. Already it seemed that word of their coming had gone before them, and at once they were admitted silently and without question. Quickly Gandalf strode across the white-paved court. A sweet fountain played there in the morning sun, and a sward of bright green lay about it. But in the midst, drooping over the pool, stood a dead tree, and the falling drops dripped sadly from its barren and broken branches back into the clear water. Pippin glanced at it as he hurried after Gandalf. It looked mournful, he thought, and he wondered why the dead tree was left in this place, where everything else was well tended. 7 stars and 7 stones, and 1 white tree. The words that Gandalf had murmured came back into his mind, and then he found himself at the doors of the great hall beneath the gleaming tower, and behind the wizard he passed the tall, silent door wardens, and entered the cool, echoing shadows of the House of Stone. They walked down a paved passage, long and empty, and as they went, Gandalf spoke softly to Pippin. "Be careful of your words, Master Peregrine. There is no time for hobbit pertness. Theoden is a kindly old man. Denethor is of another sort. Proud and subtle, a man of far greater lineage and power, though he is not called a king. But he will speak most to you and question you much, since you can tell him of his son, Boromir. He loved him greatly, too much perhaps, and the more so because they were unlike. But under cover of this love he will think it easier to learn what he wishes from you rather than from me. Do not tell him more than you need, and leave quiet the matter of Frodo's errand. I will deal with that in due time. And say nothing about Aragorn either, unless you must." "Why not? What is wrong with Strider?" Pippin whispered. "He meant to come here, didn't he? And he'll be arriving soon himself anyway." Maybe, said Gandalf. "Though if he comes, it is likely to be in some way that no one expects. not even Denethor. It will be better so. At least he should come unheralded by us." Gandalf halted before the tall door of polished metal. "See, Master Peregrine, there is no time to instruct you now in the history of Gondor, though it might have been better if you had learned something of it when you were still birds nesting and playing truant in the woods of the Shire. Do as I bid. It is scarcely wise when bringing the news of the death of his heir to a mighty lord to speak over much of the coming of one who will, if he comes, claim the kingship. Is that enough?" "Kingship?" said Pippin, amazed. "Yes," said Gandalf. "If you have walked all these days with closed ears and mind asleep, wake up now." He knocked on the door. And with those words, Daniel just woke up. But I am going to pause it right there for the night. We're going to go ahead and finish this chapter tomorrow, right at the door of Denethor, and we get to meet him tomorrow when we read again. And I hope that you're enjoying the story. And I know it wasn't a very long portion of the chapter. Kimberly's got an art gallery to show you really quickly. She has been just enamored with drawing eyes lately, and I want you to be able to have the opportunity to see them. They're really nice. Here we go.
Well, I've always been really bad at it, so I started working on it. And this is what I did today. Ta-da! I hope you liked reading The Return of the King in Heavy D Storytelling. Have a good night and God bless.